Welcome to the PM Center's USA complimentary webinar on the exam changes that PMI is proposing to make to the PMP exam in 2020. My name is Rick Clare, and I'm a partner with and the Director of Solution Services for PM Centers USA. I will be your presenter today. I've been working in IT for more than 30 years now as a developer, trainer, project manager, and business analyst. In addition to my corporate duties, I am also a frequent speaker at various national organizations and an adjunct professor of project management in the master's program at Northeastern University. In this presentation, we're going to take a look at what participants need to do to prepare to take the PMP exam. We're going to review the application and the test process and the recent changes to those. We're also going to look at the fundamental structure changes that PMI is putting in place for the exam itself in 2020, and especially examine the knowledge-based question changes that are related to Agile. We will have 4 topics: the PMP program itself, the application process for the PMP, how to maintain the PMP certification, and Agile. We're going to start off by looking at the PMP program. Globally recognized and demanded, the PMP Credential demonstrates to employers, clients, and colleagues that a project manager possesses project management knowledge, experience, and the skills to bring projects to successful completion. As a PMP candidate, we encourage you to read the PMP Credential Handbook, which contains information on how you can apply for the globally recognized and highly valued PMP credential. This handbook applies to both computer-based and paper-based testing candidates. The purpose of this handbook is to provide you with important information about the policies and procedures for obtaining and maintaining the PMP credential. In this topic, I'll go through some of the highlights from the PMP Credential Handbook. The PMP credential is accredited by the American National Standards Institute, ANSI, against the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. This includes vigorous requirements for examination development and maintenance, and for the quality management systems for continuing quality assurance for those exams. In addition, the PMP credential is also registered against the ISO Standard for Quality Management Systems. This accreditation provides a third-party affirmation of quality in the development, management, and governance of the PMP credential. It also gives credential holders and organizations who employ them additional confidence in the PMP credential. PMI's certification and credentials are distinguished by their global development and application, which makes them transferable across industries and geographical borders. PMI's certification program is designed to ensure that all certification holders have demonstrated their competency through fair and valid measures. Note that you don't have to join PMI to take the PMP exam, but when we discuss the certification cost, you'll see it's advantageous to belong to PMI. Essentially, it's one cost exchanged for the other. Also note that the exam measures your knowledge of project management. It does not measure your skill at applying those knowledge to projects. That is learned through experience. The PMP program was initiated in 1984 to recognize an individual's demonstrated understanding of project knowledge. Candidates have responsibility for planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling and closing projects. These are the things that need to be in place for you to achieve the PMP credential. First of all, you need to satisfy all educational and experience requirements established by PMI in order to apply for the exam. You need to agree to follow the PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. You need to complete and submit the application and pay a test fee. And you need to do the exam, demonstrating project management knowledge. In order to apply for the exam, you need to have satisfied this educational requirement. You need to have 35 contact hours of project management training. There's no time frame for this requirement. You can go back many years, but you must be able to show this education happening. There are many sources for this. University and college programs, for instance, quite often qualify. Training companies. PMI chapters often offer programs and courses. There are many PMI registered education providers, of which PM Centers USA is one. There are company-sponsored programs run by your organization and distance learning companies. You've also got to fit into one of these two experience categories. The first one, probably the most common, is for someone who has a bachelor's or equivalent university degree. In this case, you need 4,500 hours of actual project management experience over a minimum of 3 years, but not more than 8 years. Pay attention to that last part. That 8 years means that this is a window that's moving always. If you've done some project management 10 years ago, it does not qualify. The second category is with a high school diploma or equivalent, but in that case you need 7,500 hours of project management experience over a minimum of 5 years, but not more than 8 years. If you don't meet the experience requirements in either of those two categories for the PMP, consider the Certified Associate in Project Management, the CAPM certification. Note the certification requirements are much lower. All you need is the high school diploma, 1,500 hours of experience, or 23 hours of project management education. Note that or. If you have some education in project management but no actual experience, you can write this exam. Part of the process is signing and agreeing to follow the Code of Professional Conduct. Ethics is about making the best possible decisions concerning people, resources, and the environment. Ethical choices diminish risk, advance positive results, increase trust, determine long-term success, and build good reputations. Leadership is absolutely dependent on ethical choices. PMI members have demonstrated that honesty, responsibility, respect, and fairness are the values that drive ethical conduct for the project management profession. PMI's Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct applies those values to the real-life practice of project management, where the best outcome is the most ethical one. All PMI members, volunteers, certification holders, and certification applicants must comply with the code. To read the Code of Professional Conduct, from the home page, click on the Certification tab, scroll to the bottom, and click on the box titled Code of Ethics. Okay, well, let's start by taking a look at the exam structure the way that it is now. This is valid through December of 2020. Essentially, the exam is going to change the 1st of January, in fact, the 2nd of January, of course, 2021. All the time since the beginning of the exam in '84 up until now, the exam questions have been distributed amongst 5 domains. These are the 5 process groups that are found inside the PMBOK guide: initiating the project, planning the project, executing the project, monitoring, controlling the project, and closing the project. Beginning in 2021, on January 2nd, the exam questions are now going to be distributed amongst 3 domains, quite a different approach. People, 42% of the questions, the process, 50% of the questions, and the business environment, 8%. Note that those process questions are going to be very similar to many of the old exam questions based on the processes that are found inside the PMBOK guide. This is different. Here's a little bit more detail on the breakdown of the 3 domains. First of all, the people one. I'm not going to read through each of these, but there are a number that stand out. Building a team and leading a team, for instance. This is where questions related to that, which used to fit in our minds into the HR, the human resources area, will fit in. They'll be talking about virtual teams. They'll be talking about team performance, project agreements and negotiation and collaboration, and also on how to manage conflict. Here's the second domain, process, which, as you recall, is going to be about 50% of the questions. This is probably the most similar to the old exam, this breakdown. Here we're talking about project artifacts, budget, schedule, quality, scope, planning activities, managing issues, communications, and risk. These are things that fit into the PMBOK and the description of the processes that are in there. This is the third domain, the business environment. This is pretty new. Certainly there would be questions that would fit into this category that would look familiar to people taking the exam in the older environment. But really these subjects spread out like this are fairly new. This first one, for instance, project compliance. They're really talking about two things here. How your project has to be in compliance with your organization's project management practices. But there's also going to be some elements here of how projects have to be in compliance with government regulations. It's a fairly important thing these days. You'll be looking at how you evaluate and deliver benefits and value, how you address changes to the business environment, and how you support organizational change overall. All right, so we've looked at the change in the domains, the switch from the 5 process groups to the 3 new domains to provide question context of people, process, and the business environment. In fact, however, the changes that PMI is proposing for the PMP exam are much more substantial than that. In this first point, it brings out the fact that PMI has always stated that their questions will come from many sources. This isn't really anything new. However, they weren't really doing it. What they did was they provided the PMBOK, and that was the source for study in most cases. And they also gave a list of books that you could also read that would potentially provide the source of questions. Okay, but they weren't really doing this. That's no longer the case. They're making it very clear that the PMBOK will not be the sole source for questions. So you need to pay attention to this. They're moving away also from the questions being knowledge and process-based and more into situational questions. Instead of a simplistic question like, which of the following is not, and you're given 4 choices, you'll be put into a project management situation and asked a question about what would be the best approach to follow in a certain situation. That's what a situational question is. You can expect many of the questions on the new exam to be like this. The point to remember about this one is that you can't study for these. You go ahead and read the PMBOK and measure and memorize it from back to front. It will not help you answer a question like that. That has to be based on your own experience as a project manager and the best practices that are out there. The other change, also big, is about Agile. We're going to be talking more about Agile in a bit in its own section. But basically, PMI came out with something called the Agile Practice Guide in 2017. And now they're going to be including Agile questions on the exam. And it isn't just a matter of taking a look at that Agile Practice Guide and getting the information in it. It's a matter of understanding that any questions could potentially have a context of Agile and not just waterfall, or as they refer to it as traditional. Here's another proposed change that PMI is thinking about putting in place. This doesn't really impact you, the candidate for the PMP exam, so much as it does the registered education providers, of which there are many in the world. PMI is proposing to more tightly control the PMP Preparation Courses. Instead of REPs being allowed to use their own material, PMI is thinking about putting its own material in place and requiring a course like this to use the PMI's own material. They would also be looking to certify the instructors that are doing this. PMI states that this is being done in order to control the quality of PMP preparation material that is out there. All right, now let's take a look at the PMP exam application process. There's a series of steps that you've got to follow. We will detail all of those here and also discuss some of the changes that have happened to those. In step 1, you submit the certification application, and you can do this online. There's membership fees and non-member fees that are associated with this. And note, by the way, that the difference between those is more or less the fee that you'll be charged to become a member of PMI. So you're encouraged to join PMI, even if it's just for the year that you're applying for this exam. You're going to have to submit various verification forms to prove your education and your experience. Note that PMI selects a number of those applications to be audited, and that the number of these audits has been going up in the past few years. Step 2, you receive the eligibility notification that tells you that your application has been accepted. It reviews those applications for completeness within 5 business days after the receipt of the online application. If you're audited, you're going to have 90 days from then to provide the additional information that they're after. PMI sends the certification eligibility email to qualifying candidates. Make sure you keep that. You're going to be required to use it when you write the exam. And you must write your exam within a year of receipt of the PMP eligibility. There are some changes to the process for taking the exam. Note that these have taken effect already at the start of 2019. The 2 changes are essentially that PMI has switched from its provider, used to be Prometric, it's now Pearson VUE, and it has its own set of testing centers. The second change, though, is pretty substantial. It's now possible to take this exam from home on your own computer. Okay? There's a number of limitations that apply, and note that online proctoring, which can be pretty severe, will apply. You'll be monitored throughout the exam by the use of your camera on your computer, and you'll be required to pan that camera around the room and show the proctor, who will be assigned to you alone, show the proctor everything that's going on in the room to make sure that you don't have cheat notes and things like that available. A couple of additional notes. China has not changed its approach to this. China, the government in China is in stronger control of most things, and this is no exception. It will control the way these exams are written, and not PMI. Okay? You can register by phone or online. You can take the testing at any time, every day of the week. You've got to make the reservation in advance. And upon completion of the exam, you immediately, electronically, receive a report indicating pass or fail status, which is good. You don't have to wait. A couple of things to note. If you reschedule or cancel your exam within 30 days of your scheduled appointment, you'll be charged a fee of $70. The 30-day period does not include the day of the exam appointment. For example, if you scheduled your exam for the 5th of May, you must reschedule or cancel the exam on or before April 4th, 1 month in advance, to avoid the fee. If you wait until you are within 2 days of your exam appointment, you can cancel the appointment, but you're going to forfeit the entire exam fee. You will not also be able to re-register and reschedule your appointment at this point, and will need to pay the associated re-examination fees to schedule a new exam. Essentially, you're starting from scratch if you do that. For emergency situations in which you're unable to change your exam appointment, there is an extenuating circumstance policy that may apply. However, PMI is going to evaluate each one of those situations on a case-by-case basis to determine if a refund of the scheduling fee is appropriate. The dog ate my homework is probably not going to work for you here. If you pass, you'll get an official letter, a PMP certification pin, and a certificate, frameable, sent in approximately 2 weeks. If you fail, however, you're going to need to resubmit a re-examination form with the application exam fee. The amount is lower, but you're essentially paying a fairly large fee to do the exam. Examination results, note, are confidential, and they will not be disclosed to third parties. Here's a quick rundown on the application and certification process, shown as a process flow map. First of all, you've got your online application submission, and at that point the window is open 90 days for you to resubmit information if you get audited and they require more. Application completeness review is going to be within 5 calendar days when submitted online, and note that if they ask for additional information, that 5 calendar days starts after you give them that information. If you exceed that 90 days, you're done. You're going to have to start again from scratch. You make your application payment. At that point, you're all set up and ready to take the exam. You may be audited. If you are, that's going to have an impact on what went on before. But if you are ready, you move on to take the exam, and you've got 1 year from the date of your application approval. And then, following that, every 3 years, you've got to go through the recertification cycle, which we'll talk about. For topic 3, we're going to take a look at how to maintain the PMP certification. The changes that apply here were mostly put in place about 5 years ago. That was the introduction of the PMI's talent triangle. We're going to go through them again here, but there aren't really changes to this as part of the current crop of changes. Okay? PMP has got to satisfy that the continuing certification requirements, the CCR process, is being maintained by you. What you've got to do during that 3-year cycle is attain 60 professional development units, PDUs. And of course, you must continue to adhere to PMI's Code of Professional Conduct. Category is education. You need to earn at least 35 PDUs in this major category. Category A is courses offered by PMI REPs, such as PM Centers USA. These providers adhere to quality criteria established by PMI and are solely authorized to issue PDU certificates to attendees. Obviously, this includes the courses and the webinars offered by us. REP courses are approved in advance by PMI, so you'll know it will count towards recertification. Category B, academic courses being offered by a university or college or training organizations that are not registered with PMI. You're going to need extensive documentation for these, such as the course syllabus, to prove that this training counts towards recertification. And Category C, individualized learning events involving personally conducted research or study, such as reading articles, books, or instructional materials, watching videos, interactive CDs, or podcasts. Note that you're limited to 30 PDUs in this category. You must have at least 5 in one of the other 2. Here's the PMI talent triangle. Note the 3 legs: technical project management, leadership, and strategic and business management. As I mentioned earlier, quite often questions come up, do the 3 new domains for questions on the PMP exam map to these? And the answer is no. The closest would be that technical project management, which is probably mostly consisting of the stuff that would appear in the process questions. But strategic and business management is about more than just the business environment, and leadership is a fairly different topic than people. Okay? You need to earn at least 8 PDUs in leadership, technical project management, and strategic and business management. The second major category is giving back. You can earn a maximum of 25 PDUs in this major category. Category D is creating new project management material, such as writing articles and or presenting on PM topics. Category E is volunteer service, such as volunteer for project management, organization, and or working on PMI standards for PMI. And Category S is working as a professional, doing your job based on what a person does to learn new things and to improve skills by actually serving as a project manager. There's a maximum of 25 PDUs in this area. For our last topic, we're going to be taking a look at Agile. This is also a fairly substantial change to the nature of the questions that are going to appear on the PMP. The easiest way to think about it is now, just about any question could have the context of an Agile environment as opposed to a traditional one. In 2017, PMI provided the Agile Practice Guide as a supplement to the guide for the project management body of knowledge, but didn't do anything about it at that point. Okay? In 2020, PMI plans to incorporate this into the PMP exam. But here's something that's important to note. The Agile Practice Guide is a start, but in fact, you've got to know Agile better than the Practice Guide describes it. You've got to actually be familiar with the methodology and how it's used, because any exam questions theoretically could now have an Agile context. I'm going to give you a quick breakdown on the topics that appear in the Agile Practice Guide. But again, please understand, this is not enough by itself. Even reading that Agile Practice Guide, in the same way that reading and memorizing the PMBOK will no longer do the trick by itself, that Agile practice guide will not do the trick either. In the introduction to Agile, the practice guide talks about what Agile is. It talks about the Agile Manifesto and the many different Agile methods. While it's true that Scrum is probably the best known one and the most commonly used, there are others. And the Agile Practice Guide goes out of its way not to talk about any specific methodology, but to be general and speak of them all. The Practice Guide then moves on to discussing life cycles. It starts by indicating that life cycles must be selected for particular projects. One of the myths that exists out there in the world today, sometimes from the Agile community, is that Agile is the new way of doing things and the old way, commonly called waterfall, is old-fashioned and should be abolished. It's just not true. Not at all. Projects need to be considered and their backgrounds need to be taken into account when you decide which of the methodologies you're going to use. The practice guide completely supports this sensible way of thinking. It talks about how you should be deciding on which life cycle makes sense to you. It starts by talking about the predictive life cycle. Again, most of us think about this as waterfall. That word is not used in the practice guide. They refer to predictive or plan-driven or sometimes traditional ways to contrast them with the others. But then it talks about iterative, incremental, and agile life cycles sort of separately, because even though they share an awful lot, they really are different and they need to be thought of in different ways. And it wraps up this section of the Agile Practice Guide by talking about hybridization and different approaches to hybridization, perhaps combining some aspects of a predictive life cycle with others of an incremental. The next section in the Agile Practice Guide is about the Agile Environment, and it starts by talking about servant leadership. This is a fairly important concept, which just because of the nature of project management in the modern world, most PMs are probably already familiar with. The old vision of leadership from, say, the 50s and 60s, which was of a vibrant, charismatic person who knew more than everybody else and led simply because of how good and how cool they were, is not really effective in today's world, which is much more about teams and collaboration. Instead, servant leadership is showing up a lot. Servant leadership specifically is a type of leadership where the person doing the leading makes sure that everyone else gets the credit. Okay? If you've become a leader because you want everybody to worship at your feet, this is not a style of leadership for you, because in a perfect servant leadership environment, people may not even be aware that there is a leader. In any case, Agile lives and breathes through this kind of servant leadership because the people who are in charge of the team are the team members. One of the odd things about Agile to many organizations is that there is no leader. Okay? The team is in charge. For instance, in Scrum, the leader is called a Scrum Master. It's not a great term because the implication is that you're in charge of something. In fact, what you're in charge of is Scrum, the process. You are the expert on how to do Scrum, but you are not the boss of the team. The team is. This section moves on to talk about different Agile teams and the roles that different team members can play, and also about the general environment in which Agile thrives. They then talk about doing Agile. Actual practices that you can put in place to conduct Agile in your organization. They start by talking about a project charter, but from an Agile perspective. They talk about the product backlog, which is the list of work to be done on the project. They talk about common Agile activities, and many of these, by the way, are the same terms that Scrum uses. What has happened, of course, is that Scrum, because of its commonness and its general appeal across the board, has given its names to many of the things that other Agile environments and methodologies were doing. They just weren't perhaps using those terms. Essentially, PMI is defining in these common Agile activities terms that, even if they are applying to Scrum, can be safely considered as applying to all Agile methods. It talks about agile challenges and things that are in the way, impediments and roadblocks that organizations can somehow, and in some cases, have in place that will cause problems for agile. And it also talks about measuring agile performance. And finally, the Agile Practice Guide takes a look at the organization and agile. It starts off by talking about the organization culture and the changes that it's going to have to go through to properly support agile. It then talks about a specific topic, agile and procurement and contracts, because this traditionally is an area that agile and the normal way that a company does business can not work too well together. A perfect example is here. An agile sprint, a single incremental time period in which work is done, is usually really limited. For instance, in Scrum, the longest a sprint can be is 4 weeks. Okay, how long does it take your organization to sign a contract and arrange for the purchase of something? I can assure you it's a lot longer than 4 weeks in most cases. What does that mean? That all this stuff needs to be set up in advance before the Agile project even starts? What if you discover during your sprint that the piece of equipment that's already been purchased and is been delivered is not going to be sufficient? Agile is all about embracing change, and you've got to be able to support change like that, even in the face of an organization's 2-month-long procurement cycle. So the Agile Practice Guide suggests a number of changes that the organization should consider to support Agile better. It also talks about business practices and how those might have to change, how to scale Agile to move from a single small project with a single team up to many teams operating simultaneously. And it talks in more general terms about the organizational structure and what Agile is probably going to do to that. We've already talked about a number of those things. For instance, there's the basic idea that an Agile team is its own master, flies in the face of most organization structure where someone is the boss. Okay, that's just not going to be the case anymore. The organization has got to be prepared to flex and embrace that way of thinking, at least for the Agile projects. Okay, thank you for listening to our webinar. I hope you learned some things here. What we talked about during this presentation was the PMP program and the changes that are happening to the content of that program. We talked about the PMP application process and some of the changes that are happening there. We talked about maintaining PMP certification and how that's not really changing for this round of modifications to the PMP. But the last topic is certainly a change, and that's the inclusion of Agile. You're invited to connect with us on PM Centers USA. We have a number of groups in LinkedIn. We have the Juggling Act, which is a general discussion forum on project management and business analysis. We have a group for alumni of PM Centers USA's classes. You're automatically enrolled in that when you take a course of ours. And we have a set of webinars under the Food for Thought group. This webinar you probably accessed through this group. We're also available on Twitter, and you can look at any of our courses online by visiting www.pmcentersusa.com. If you have any questions on this topic and anything that we talked about during this webinar, or in fact on anything project management or business analysis related, you're invited to contact us at 888-762-3683 or to live chat with us from our website, www.pmcentersusa.com.